It was just past midnight when I pulled into the diner parking lot. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the cold night air, casting a flickering glow across the cracked pavement. I just finished a brutal double shift at the hospital, and I was running on fumes, emotionally and literally. The diner was mostly empty, save for a couple in a booth near the window and a man sitting alone in the far corner. He was hunched over a cup of coffee, staring into it like it held all the answers to his problems. I took a seat at the counter, ordered a burger and fries to go, and rubbed my temples as I waited. The man in the corner must have noticed me because, after a moment, he cleared his throat. "Long night?" he asked, his voice gravelly but oddly cheerful. I turned slightly, offering a polite nod. "Yeah, something like that." He smiled, too wide, too toothy, and said, "Hard-working girl like you shouldn't be out so late. Dangerous things happen after midnight." I forced a polite smile, hoping it would end the conversation, but he kept talking. "You from around here?" he asked, his eyes fixed on me like he was studying every detail of my face. I lied and said no, hoping that would make me seem less trackable. He chuckled softly, stirring his coffee with one of those thin plastic straws. "Smart girl. You never know who you might run into." The waitress appeared with my takeout bag, breaking the tension. I grabbed it quickly, muttering a thanks and fumbling with my wallet. As I turned to leave, I felt the man's eyes follow me all the way to the door. Outside, the air was sharp and freezing, my breath coming out in short clouds as I walked to my car. That uneasy feeling stayed with me, like an itch at the back of my neck. As I started my engine, I glanced in my rearview mirror. His car, a dark, older sedan with one headlight slightly dimmer than the other, was parked a few spaces behind mine. It looked empty, but my stomach still nodded. "Relax," I told myself. "He's just another guy killing time in a diner. It's nothing." But the drive home felt different. The road was emptier, the shadows deeper. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see those mismatched headlights trailing behind me. They never did. I got home just past 1 a.m., my apartment complex silent and still under the dim glow of the parking lot lights. I locked the car doors out of habit, clutching the paper bag of diner food as I hurried up the stairs to my unit. The night felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Once inside, I triple-locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and tossed my jacket onto the couch. Murphy, my cat, greeted me with a half-hearted meow before curling back up on his favorite blanket. I microwaved the now lukewarm burger, trying to shake off the lingering unease from the diner. The man was just off. His smile, his stare, it clung to me like a bad smell. At some point, I fell asleep on the couch with the TV playing softly in the background. I must have been out for an hour or two when my phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting me awake. The screen lit up with a notification. "Motion detected at your front door." My chest tightened as I sat up and clicked the alert. The screen loaded, and there it was, footage from my doorbell camera. At first, I didn't see anything. The porch was empty, just a faint glow from the parking lot in the background. But then I spotted him. The man from the diner was standing just off-center in the camera's frame, his head tilted slightly, staring directly into the lens. He wasn't moving, wasn't knocking, just watching. His mouth was slightly open, as if he was mid-sentence, but no sound came through. The timestamp read 3:07 a.m. My stomach clenched as I stared at the frozen image on my phone screen. The man's face, partially obscured by the grainy night vision of the doorbell camera, looked twisted, his mouth hanging open just enough to reveal teeth glinting faintly in the glow from the parking lot lights. I swiped to refresh the live feed, praying he'd be gone. But he wasn't. The screen flickered, and there he was, still standing there, still staring. His head tilted slightly more to the side now, like a curious animal sizing up its prey. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I forced myself to take a deep breath and open the intercom feature on the app. "Can I help you?" I said, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, his head straightened, and he stepped closer to the camera. His lips twitched into that same wide, toothy grin I'd seen at the diner. He leaned in, his face filling the screen. In a low, raspy voice, he said 2 words. "Found you." I slammed my phone down and stumbled backward, my pulse pounding in my ears. Murphy hissed, his fur standing on end as he bolted under the couch. I grabbed my keys and my coat, adrenaline surging through me. I wasn't staying here, not with him outside my door. But as I reached for the door, my phone buzzed again. A new notification. Motion detected at your back door. I froze, my hand hovering over the front door lock as the notification stared back at me. The back door. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, and the back door led to a small balcony overlooking the parking lot. There was no way anyone could reach it without a ladder or without planning. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. Motion detected at your back door. Heart hammering. I tiptoed toward the sliding glass door leading to the balcony. The curtains were drawn, but I could see faint shadows moving behind the thin fabric. Slowly, with trembling fingers, I pulled the curtain aside just an inch, just enough to see. He was there, the man from the diner, standing on my balcony, his breath fogging up the glass as he stared inside. His grin was stretched wider now, his teeth bared in a twisted, unnatural smile. In his hand, he held something. A small object I couldn't make out, glinting faintly in the dim light. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it this time. My mind was screaming for me to do something. Call the police. Run. Anything. But before I could act, there was a sharp knock on the sliding glass door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Tap, tap, tap. His head tilted again, his grin never fading. Then, in one slow motion, he lifted his hand and held the object up against the glass. My breath caught in my throat. It was my wallet. My wallet. He must have taken it at the diner or maybe even earlier. My stomach churned as I realized he'd had my address the entire time. My name, my photo, everything. The man on the balcony tapped the wallet against the glass, slow and deliberate, his grin never fading. I stumbled back, clutching my phone, my mind racing. Call the police. I fumbled with the screen, my shaking fingers barely managing to dial 911. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, steady and calm. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man on my balcony. He followed me home. He's staring at me right now. He has my wallet. My voice was shaking so hard it barely sounded like me. Stay on the line, ma'am. Officers are on their way. Are you somewhere safe? Safe? Was anywhere safe with him standing just a sheet of glass away? I crouched behind the couch, clutching Murphy to my chest as he let out a low growl. From my hiding spot, I could still see the man's silhouette through the curtain. He wasn't moving anymore, just standing there, waiting. Then, without warning, he leaned forward and licked the glass, his tongue leaving a smeared trail across the cold surface. He dropped my wallet on the balcony floor, gave one last tilt of his head, and then he stepped backward into the shadows. I stayed frozen behind the couch until I heard distant sirens cutting through the silence. When the police arrived, they searched the balcony, the parking lot, and the surrounding area. But he was gone. The only trace of him was my wallet, still lying where he'd dropped it. The officer stayed for over an hour, asking questions, checking every door and window, and reassuring me that they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night. But I could see it in their faces. They didn't expect to find him. These types of people don't stick around once they know we've been called. One officer said, his voice calm but tired. They left me with a card, a number to call if I noticed anything else unusual. But what was I supposed to do now? The apartment felt hollow. Every shadow stretched too long. Every creak of the building amplified tenfold. I sat on the floor with Murphy curled in my lap, staring at the sliding glass door where faint smears of saliva still glistened in the faint light. My wallet sat on the coffee table, open to my driver's license. My address. My name. I didn't sleep that night. Every flicker of light outside, every distant noise, sent my pulse racing. Morning couldn't come fast enough, and as soon as the sun rose, I packed a bag and drove straight to my sister's house across town. The police never found him. They told me it was likely a crime of opportunity, that he might have seen me alone at the diner and decided to follow me. But I can't shake the feeling that it was more than that he knew too much, that he had planned something. It's been weeks, but I still can't relax. I moved out of my apartment, changed my phone number, deleted my social media. But every now and then, I still get that creeping sensation, that itch at the back of my neck, that someone's watching me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I think I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. The gas station sat like a lonely island in a sea of darkness. Its buzzing fluorescent lights cut through the pitch-black night, casting a sickly yellow glow on the cracked asphalt. I'd been driving for hours, my playlist reduced to faint background noise as exhaustion settled heavy on my shoulders. The sign outside flickered, 24-hour convenience. It was the only sign of life for miles, and I needed caffeine and something salty before I could keep going. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and floor cleaner hung in the air. Rows of mismatched snacks and faded magazines lined the shelves. I grabbed an energy drink and a bag of chips, my footsteps loud against the tile floor. That's when I felt it. A pair of eyes on me. Two men stood near the freezer section, half hidden behind the glass doors. They weren't shopping, weren't browsing, they were watching me. One was tall and wiry with sunken cheeks, the other shorter and stockier, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. They whispered to each other, their eyes flicking toward me every few seconds. I kept my head down as I approached the counter, forcing a casual smile at the bored-looking cashier who barely glanced up from his phone. My skin prickled with every step, the weight of those two men's stares pressing into my back. I paid for my snacks, muttered a quick thanks, and walked briskly back to my car, my keys already clenched tightly in my hand. Outside, the night felt colder. The gas station lights buzzed faintly behind me as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. I locked the doors immediately, tossing the bag of snacks onto the passenger seat. Through my rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of them. They were standing just inside the gas station doors, still watching me, still whispering. Their faces were unreadable, but their focus was crystal clear. Me, shaking off the unease, I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of black with no other cars in sight. I told myself they were just a couple of weird guys, nothing more. But 20 minutes later, when I glanced in my rearview mirror again, I saw it. A pair of headlights trailing me at a steady distance. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just another driver on the same lonely stretch of road. But the car stayed with me through every curve, every hill, matching my speed perfectly. When I slowed down, they slowed down. When I sped up, they did too. My stomach tightened as realization set in. They were following me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The headlights in my rearview mirror felt like two sharp eyes, unblinking and relentless. I told myself to stay calm, to think logically. Maybe they're just headed in the same direction. But deep down, I knew better. Every time I glanced back, the car stayed the same distance behind me. Too close to be casual, too far to make a move. I spotted a sign up ahead, rest stop 1 mile. It wasn't much, but it was better than driving blind into the dark with those headlights breathing down my neck. I flicked on my blinker, turning into the narrow rest stop entrance, gravel crunching under my tires as I parked near the faint glow of a single, flickering street lamp. The other car followed. My stomach knotted as their engine cut off behind me. I could see their silhouettes through the windshield, both men still sitting there, still watching. I forced myself to breathe, opening my door slowly and stepping out into the cold night air. The wind howled faintly through the empty trees lining the lot, and the hum of insects filled the silence. "Hey there, buddy." The taller man's voice cut through the night as he stepped out of the car, his wiry frame silhouetted against the headlights. The stockier one followed, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "Looks like you're headed the same way as us." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, just stretching my legs." The taller man chuckled. the sound sharp and humorless. Funny, we were just talking about needing a little help. Seems like you're just the guy to give it to us. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct in me screamed that whatever was about to happen wasn't going to end well. I took a step back, my boots crunching on the gravel as the two men closed the distance between us. The taller one kept smiling thin, stretched, like a mask barely holding together. The stockier man stayed quiet, his hands still buried deep in his pockets, his eyes locked onto mine. "What kind of help do you need?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. The taller man's grin faltered slightly. "Oh, nothing much. Our car's been acting up, and my buddy here thought you might have some tools in your trunk. You look like a helpful guy." I glanced at their car. It was still running, exhaust curling up into the cold night air. No steam from the engine, no sound of misfires. They were lying. "Sorry, guys. I don't have anything. I was just about to hit the road again," I said, taking another small step backward. The stocky man shifted slightly, his left hand pulling something halfway out of his coat pocket. A glint of metal. A knife. "Ah, come on now," the taller man said, his voice lowering. "Don't be rude. We just need a little time. With you." Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted back to my car, slamming the door shut and locking it in one motion. My hands fumbled with the ignition as I jammed the keys in, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The two men were already at my window, their faces inches from the glass. The taller man slammed his palm against it, his grin replaced with something predatory. The shorter one was circling toward the passenger side door, testing the handle. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing against the gravel. My headlights swept across their twisted faces as I backed up, turning sharply and speeding out of the rest stop, gravel and dust kicking up behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing there, their shadows stretched long in the headlights of their still-running car. But they didn't follow. They just stood there, watching, as I disappeared back onto the highway. I didn't stop driving. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, my foot pressed hard against the gas pedal. The highway stretched endlessly into the darkness, the faint glow of distant stars barely cutting through the black sky. Every time I glanced at my rearview mirror, I half expected to see their headlights trailing me again. But the road behind me remained empty. Eventually, I spotted another gas station up ahead, a larger one, bright with fluorescent lights and a handful of cars parked out front. I pulled in, parked right under the floodlights, and locked my doors before letting out a shaky breath. My chest felt tight, my throat raw from holding back the urge to scream. Inside the station, I explained what happened to the cashier, an older guy with deep bags under his eyes and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. He listened, nodding slowly, before pulling out a landline phone to call the local sheriff. "You're not the first one, kid," he said, his voice low. "There've been stories about those two for months now. They wait out there on the quieter stretches of road, looking for someone vulnerable." The sheriff arrived about 30 minutes later, a heavy-set man with a tired expression and a hand that rested casually on his holstered gun. He took my statement, asked for descriptions of the men and their car, and assured me they'd check the area. But as he spoke, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. This wasn't new. Before I left, the cashier gave me a free cup of coffee and patted me on the shoulder. "Stick to well-lit places from now on, all right? Don't stop unless you have to." I nodded and got back on the road, the coffee scalding my throat as I sipped it. The rest of the drive was silent, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. Every pair of headlights I passed made my stomach knot. Every parked car made my skin crawl. I made it home just as the sky was starting to lighten with dawn. I parked in my driveway, sat in my car for a long moment, and stared at my trembling hands. The sheriff called me the next day. They'd found the rest stop empty. The car was gone, no trace of the two men. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I still think about them. The way they stared, the way they whispered, the way they seemed to enjoy the fear they caused. And every time I pass an empty rest stop or see a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, I can't help but wonder, are they still out there waiting for the next car to pull in? The rest area was the kind you only see in movies, the kind where bad things happen. A single, flickering fluorescent light buzzed above the cracked pavement, casting long, distorted shadows. My car was the only one parked by the bathroom, except for a beat-up sedan a few spaces away. Its windows were tinted, and the engine was off. Behind the wheel sat a man. He was slouched slightly, one elbow propped on the window frame, his face obscured by shadows. But I could feel his eyes on me, heavy, unblinking. I hurried into the bathroom, the door creaking as it closed behind me. The inside wasn't much better. Dim lighting, cracked mirrors, and graffiti etched into every surface. My hands shook as I turned on the faucet, the icy water grounding me for a moment. He's probably just another traveler, I told myself. You're being paranoid. But as I walked back to my car, I dared a glance at the sedan. The man was still there, still watching. When I started my engine and pulled back onto the highway, I watched him in my rearview mirror. The sedan's headlights flicked on. He was following me. The sedan stayed behind me, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror like two predatory eyes. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just coincidence. He probably had somewhere to go, just like me. But every time I changed lanes, so did he. When I sped up, he matched my speed. When I slowed down, he mirrored me perfectly. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel as I scanned the road ahead. Up ahead, a neon glow cut through the darkness. A gas station. It wasn't much, just a small convenience store with a couple of pumps and a flickering sign. But it was bright, and there were other cars parked outside. Safety in numbers, right? I pulled in, parking near the entrance under the brightest floodlight I could find. The sedan pulled in seconds later, parking a few spaces away. I watched from my car as the man stepped out. He was tall, with a thick coat zipped up to his neck and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He stood there for a moment, hands shoved deep in his pockets, before walking slowly toward the convenience store entrance. My chest felt tight as I grabbed my phone and keys, stepping out of my car and practically jogging into the store. The bell above the door jingled weakly as I entered, and the cashier, a bored-looking teenage girl, barely glanced up from her phone. I moved quickly down one of the aisles, pretending to browse snacks while trying to keep the man in my peripheral vision. Then, the bell above the door jingled again. He was inside. I ducked into an aisle near the back of the store, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I tried to steady myself. The shelves were crammed with bags of chips and dusty candy bars, their garish packaging reflecting the fluorescent lights above. I could hear the faint scuff of his boots against the tile floor as he walked past the counter. "Can I help you find something, sir?" the cashier asked, her voice carrying over the hum of a refrigerator. "No," he said flatly. His voice was low, sharp, with a strange edge to it, like he was holding something back. I peeked around the corner of the aisle and saw him moving methodically down the rows, his head tilting slightly as he scanned each one. He wasn't browsing. He was looking. Panic surged in my chest as I backed farther into the aisle, bumping into a display of soda bottles. One toppled off the stack and hit the floor with a dull thud. I froze. The man stopped walking. Slowly, he turned his head toward my aisle. "There you are," he said softly. I turned and bolted toward the back of the store. My shoes squeaked against the tile as I rounded the corner, skidding to a stop near the storage room door. It was locked. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him turning into the same aisle, his pace slow, deliberate. "Why are you running?" he said, his voice calm, almost amused. I darted down another aisle, frantically scanning for something, anything, I could use. The cashier was still at the front, her attention locked on her phone. My voice caught in my throat as I tried to yell, but all that came out was a strangled squeak. I had one chance. I grabbed a heavy glass jar of pickles from the shelf, my grip tight and unsteady, and crouched low behind a rack of canned soup. His boots stopped just feet away from me. The air felt heavy, suffocating in the silence between us. I stayed crouched low behind the shelf, clutching the glass jar so tightly my fingers ached. His boots shifted slightly, one slow step forward, then another. The hem of his coat brushed against the floor just inches from my hiding spot. "Why are you hiding?" he said softly, almost mockingly. "I just want to talk." My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to stay perfectly still. I could see his shadow stretching across the floor under the flickering fluorescent lights. Then, without warning, he crouched down on the other side of the shelf, his face partially visible between cans of soup. His wide, thin-lipped smile sent a jolt of terror through me. I didn't think, I just acted. With a guttural yell, I swung the jar of pickles as hard as I could. It smashed against his face, glass and brine exploding everywhere. He shouted in surprise and pain, clutching his bleeding face as he stumbled backward, knocking over an entire display of canned goods. "Help!" I screamed, my voice finally breaking free. "Help me!" The cashier's head snapped up from her phone, her eyes going wide with shock. "Hey, HEY!" she shouted, reaching for the phone behind the counter. I bolted down the aisle, my shoes slipping on shards of glass and pickle juice. The man was still groaning on the floor, one hand pressed against his face, the other reaching blindly in my direction. I burst through the front doors, the bell above them clanging violently as I sprinted to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys, slick with sweat as I jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as I saw the man stagger out of the store, blood smeared across his cheek, his grin twisted and furious. I didn't wait. I slammed on the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing under the gas station lights, watching me go, his head tilted at that same unnerving angle. The police met me at a well-lit truck stop an hour later. I gave them everything I could, the description, the gas station location, the cashier's name. But when they arrived at the convenience store, the man was gone. The cashier confirmed everything I told them, but the cameras had caught only fragments of the encounter. A man's shadow, the sound of glass breaking, and me running out of the store. They never found him. I didn't drive at night again for months. Every time I stopped at a gas station or a rest stop, I scanned every car, every shadow, every face. And sometimes, when the lights flicker overhead or the floor creaks just a little too loudly, I can still hear his voice. "Why are you running?"